This is Dr. Thomas Klein. I'm a rare and chronic disease specialist and outspoken advocate for people who have these god-awful diseases called rare painful diseases. So, a phenomenal thing has happened. This is the most important thing that's happened to try to reverse the last 4 years of the devastation of between 6 and 7 million people. That's a good number, by the way. Happy to show references how we got to that. There are 6 to 7 million people quietly suffering at home because the CDC convinced doctors to stop treating pain. No other agency, just the CDC. Nobody agreed with them, but because it's a government agency that we trusted, it just spread like wildfire, and it fed into what we talked about last time: fear of addiction, phobia, fear of junkies. This is a letter from the AMA, American Medical Association, and it's written to the Chief Medical Officer at the CDC in their Center for Injury Prevention. Now, how pain medicines got into the injury prevention is interesting. The CDC tried to grab opiates and opiate pain medicine to put in their jurisdiction because they overdose, and they considered overdose injury. So they snagged it as a topic. When the CDC guidelines first came out in March 15th, 2016, I went to their website to look up what they had to say about opiates, and guess what? Nothing. They put these guidelines out and they didn't even have a web page. They're not in the business of opiates. They're in the business of spreading their bizarre agenda. And what their bizarre agenda is brought to them by the bizarre group Physicians for Responsible Opioid Prescribing, who are extremists, who believe everybody who takes opioids is addicted. Last year, there were 96 million people taking opiate pain medicines. So if everybody's getting addicted, where are they? The Mayo Clinic says that anyone can become addicted, but they don't say who or how often. So that's kind of like saying, you know what? You're going to die. Like when? And from what? I'm sorry, you're going to die. Anybody can die. Well, that's kind of a nice thing to tell everybody. Anyway, back to this. Here's the 17-page letter from the AMA, and you can find it yourself by doing my short Google trick. Google AMA letter June 16 Dowell CDC. D-O-W-E-L-L-E, that's the doctor. AMA letter June 16th Dowell CDC. And you'll eventually get to it. It's from James Mandera, the CEO and Executive Vice President of the AMA. And this man has a CV as long as my arm. He's associated with the Harvard Medical School, Emory, just a long list. This is a distinguished physician and researcher. This 17-page letter basically tells the CDC, I'll quote it for you here on page 5. The CDC guideline has harmed patients. This is the first time anybody's come out and said that. This article basically says that everything the CDC has been doing is wrong. And what they did, which I thought was clever, is they took the 12 recommendations in the CDC guidelines and they rewrote them to show them to be more compassionate. They make a lot of compassionate statements. That the CDC has not been supportive of patients. They need to be committed to patients with pain through a detailed re-examination of the guidelines. In other words, this is polite language, right? In other words, it was wrong, and get on the stick and fix it. The AMA urges CDC to work with physicians and patients to ensure the revisions actually support patients with pain and the physicians who care for them. Read between the lines. They need to improve pain care for patients and not be focused on other issues that do not lead to pain care. Reading out more here. Discussing all the problems that have occurred because of these guidelines with drug companies with prior authorization, step therapy, quantity limits, and they also blast the pharmacies for just turning down people's medications. This is a very, very supportive document, and everybody should get hold of it and study it. Remember, AMA letter, June 16th, Dowell, CDC. AMA, June 16th. This is 17 pages long. Now, there's been this dose fear that we've talked about before. People have been critical of me. Oh, too high a doses. Well, guess what? There's actually no definition of a high dose. There is no federal, state, or local entity that limits the quantity or dose of any pain medicine. CDC is the only one that tried to do it. So right away, the task force that was formed by Dr. Vanila Singh basically said that people can benefit from taking prescription drugs, prescription opiates, at least they said opioid analgesic, at doses that may be greater than guideline or thresholds put forth by federal agencies. So in other words, hey, here's another statement, that doses greater than recommended by such entities may be medically necessary. In other words, high doses might actually work. We use high dose antidepressants and they sometimes work better. What's the problem with high doses in using opiate pain medicine? Because there's a belief that high doses will create more junkies. Excuse me. And who came up with that? The physicians who are responsible for opioid prescribing. No one else. No one else has put forth this. Only them. And then it got incorporated in the CDC. So the CDC became the only entity, including the World Health Organization, that attempts to limit the dose of pain medicines to prevent junkies. All right. So there are 12 recommendations in the CDC guideline, and basically the AMA has shot them all to pieces. They're also kind of ridiculous. They sort of wrote these idiotic things that you would find in any kind of medical school textbook to make it seem like this is really a legitimate thing because they were hiding number 5. We'll get to that. Number 1 recommendation, try other drugs first. When do we not do that? Do we start off with intravenous ibuprofen, which you can do when somebody has pain? No, we try other things first. Number 2, we need to set up goals and stop using the drug if it's not working. Duh. Isn't that not true for everything that we prescribe? 3, discuss the pros and cons of the medicine and pick a medicine based on your health record and other factors. Okay, so everybody gets individualized treatment. That's what we do every single day in the office, and then they write it down like we don't know what's going on. Okay, number 5. This is the biggie. This is the 90 milligram thing that has destroyed healthcare in this country. Destroyed it. It's gone. AMA said, get rid of this. There are no more numbers allowed. And using some pretty strong language. The other thing is start with the lowest effective dose. Duh. What do? We just jump in with the highest doses like we're idiots? Another ridiculous, nonsensical thing. But the key thing is number 5, recommendation number 5, that set the 90 milligram that was, of course, shot down by FDA in 2013, 3 years before the guidelines. It was shot down by the agency that's in charge of these medicines. Shot down. So how did it get published in the CDC like it had not been rejected by the FDA? Congress needs to answer that question. This country is still run by the people. And we elect people in Congress, and we need to chat with them about the destructive influence of this agency. You should start with short-acting medicines instead of long-acting medicines. We always do that. It's true for, all kinds of medicines where there's two forms. We always start with okay, you should treat for 3 to 7 days. This got picked up by a lot of state agencies and stuff. AMA says, gone. You have no right to try to limit the number of days a person gets their medication. And why are people afraid of taking it too long? More than 7 days, and you're liable to get more junkies. Problem is, where are they? We can't seem to find them. There's 800,000 heroin addicts in the U.S. That's 0.5%, and that's no different than it was in 1920. So, urine drug tests being required, that's gone. It says urine drug tests can be used if the doctor sits down and talks to the patient. What's being done in pain clinics is patients are being forced to do urine drug tests and contracts and pill counts. Where did this come from? The CDC guidelines. Where did they get it? This stuff used to be done in addiction clinics. It was never mandated for people in pain clinics. And as we said, how many people in pain clinics are going to be addicted? Unless they're faking it, none. But they believe that everybody who comes in and says, I'm in pain, needs to be checked out by the police or using these police techniques of urine drug tests. I had one patient that went to the emergency room with a seizure disorder, and they were so upset about all the medicine she was taking. They laid her on a table and forced her legs open and tried to stick a catheter in her bladder in order to do a urine drug test. Hooray for the AMA. No more required drug tests. No more drug tests without permission. Okay, another 50 milligrams shows up in the 8th recommendation when they're talking about a history of substance abuse disorder. That means they're addicts. They're talking about addicts here. Okay, that's a different subject. This is about chronic pain. The CDC guideline is about chronic pain. What are they doing talking about heroin addicts? But they did anyway. It says check the PDMP if it's related. It sounds like they're saying this is not even required anymore. I think it's a good idea to check. This is what stopped the pill mills in Florida, was the PDMP. Okay, so we're going to need to go. AMA letter, June 16th, to Deborah Dow, the CDC. As far as I can see it, this is the death of the CDC guidelines. The CDC guidelines should be retracted until they get approval from the FDA. Thank you and good night.